Welcome to the Root to Bloom podcast, where we love exploring the fertile ground of where creativity, culture, and consciousness meet. Today, we are super excited to be joined by Val, our illustrious, inimitable co founder, who is the Jedi Knights of fundraising, of resource mobilization. The facts are the facts, folks. And someone who is very dedicated to a lifelong movement practice, and some of you might know, has an incredible dance background. I want to also lift up that Val is very deeply committed to providing creatives, entrepreneurs, and investors with the support they need to fund their impact and fund the impact of purpose leaders doing the work. So, Val, we are so excited to have you with us. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, so before we dive in, could you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yes, absolutely. Happy to. A little bit about myself. I would say I am the daughter of two Caribbean islands, Haiti and Cuba, and of some really resilient immigrant parents who have their own beautiful creative practices too. I grew up in rural Haiti, but through migration have little tendrils throughout the Americas in different places. In terms of, I would say, what is a source place for me, I think Haiti is definitely my place of inspiration and of healing, as is poetry. I am a perpetual student, an avidly curious person, and I think especially of late, relentlessly optimistic and thinking that kindness can reshape our lives and reshape communities.
Thank you so much, Val. I really love the way you narrate your migration story, your kind of personal evolution, your creative journeys. That's really beautiful. So, Val, I know today we'll be speaking about something that is a bit more in the personal domain of your life related to managing chronic illness. Would you like to tell us a little bit about that? When did chronic illness become a part of your story? And really, how's that shaped your personal and professional life?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's really such a privilege to have you all create this space to talk about this. I think in part because one of the things I've realized on this journey is that I'm not journeying alone. I'm definitely not alone in this. I think there are so many ways in which Black women tend to reflect society and the difficult things sometimes in society, even when we look at health. Actually, about Black women like myself are about 50% more likely than white women to have certain types of chronic illnesses with really high comorbidities, which is basically where you get one illness that sort of engenders another and can engender another. And also just higher rates of passing away earlier from cancer, having early incidences of cancer. So I think while all of this is a difficult situation, there is solidarity that comes from knowing that, this is definitely not a me story. This is an us story. And for me, to your question about how did it become part of my story, it was really something that was accelerated post surgeries for me, seemingly simple surgeries. I have two chronic illnesses, one, or syndromes rather. One of them is called complex regional pain syndrome, very long name. I also name it because I think it's very unnamed syndrome, and another syndrome that makes it really difficult for me to eat called gastroparesis. And both of these occurred after surgeries. I think um, one of the things that, yeah, it's one of the things that's really sort of reshaped my life in the past couple of years. I think my body has a very particular strong response to surgical traumas, and I feel that it's left me In my personal and professional life, I would say more human, extra tired. And I think it's made me a kinder person overall.
Yeah, Val, thank you so much for that share. And I think it's so beautiful the way you said it's made you a kinder person, a more human person. Um, I would love to double click on that. So I don't know if that's something you're able to speak to. And also, I was very curious when you talked about the way it's reshaped your life. I have a sense of that as someone that spends a lot of time with you, but curious if that's something that you might like to share, the ways in which you've become more agile and flexible to engage in this reshaping.
Yeah, those are all great questions. I think more human in that I feel that it relates back to the first point around knowing that this can be a very isolating journey. And I definitely went through a really isolating time with it. I think pain and especially nerve pain can do that. And at the same time, it's brought me community. It's brought me new purpose, renewed understanding of, I think, the general human condition, and kinder, I think, to myself. I blamed myself a lot in the beginning somehow, and eventually just started to release a lot of things that I wouldn't have elsewise released. And I think that's made me kinder to myself and kinder to others. And in terms of how it's reshaped my life, I mean, it's reshaped my life completely. One concrete example, which I think has been a really beautiful part of the journey, is it created a real internal fracture and an inability to do as much as I was doing. And that actually led to Root to Bloom really growing. I think before my surgery, there were about three of us. And as I needed help, we sort of became a bigger collective. And it was born out of necessity, but I really think it was a necessary moment of growth that we had needed anyways. I think we are such a stronger collective for it. Now I think more in terms of community, in terms of systems, in terms of joy. Um, and so yeah, I think it's very concretely reshaped some things and also just conceptually reshaped how I look at the world and look at the work.
Yeah, it's absolutely true. That was a very tender time. We all kind of sort of tried to rally, and you're right. We went from three folks to 10 folks very quickly, and I do think it was in some ways blessings came out of that for Root to Bloom, even through a really difficult circumstance. So yeah, I appreciate you kind of grounding in that perspective. That's really beautiful. Now, like I'm very existentially curious. So I would love if you could talk about how your kind of different intersecting identities, um, as a Black woman, as a Caribbean woman, as someone who advocates for folks of color, someone that's creative, like how have all those things influenced the way you navigate both health and work now?
Yeah, a lot. Um, I would say that, and on one hand, my intersecting identities has been, and like for many women, a really difficult part of the journey. The reason why, well, the assumed reason why I have this complex regional pain syndrome, for example, resulted from a really racialized experience, medically speaking. After my surgery, my rehabilitation did not go well at all. For about 5 months, I think it was, I was seeing the hospital appointed sort of recovery specialist, and that was something that really harmed me in that she really ignored my pain. And so I would go into the different sessions. I'd always end up like dry heaving afterwards or just like trembling or even having like spasms. And when I would do sort of the rehabilitation exercises at home, it was also really intense in terms of pain level. Fast forward a little bit, come to find out that a really common effect of the kind of rehabilitation that I had from my hand surgery is that if you are pushed too far, you get this syndrome. And so, it took me a really long time to realize I was caught in this weird cycle of medical racism, and obviously that intense pain affected my life a lot. And I think just in terms of a creative, it's beautiful to be a creative, but also because my particular practice was dance, I was used to listening to body instructors telling me what to do and following that. And so I think it's made me maybe a more critical creative and realizing that there are spaces where you put your body, where so-called experts will harm you if you're not really thoughtful and tuned into that. And, in terms of how it's influenced my navigating health and work, elsewise, I think with my health, relatedly, there's this term that, was really helpful for me that was coined by somebody called Dr. William Smith, which is called racial battle fatigue. And it's sort of the cumulative stress of all these experiences that one has in hyper-racialized settings. And so I think that's really also inspired me to advocate for others to not go through some of the same experiences. Um, so yeah, and I would say lastly, in terms of my work, I feel like that's in some ways one of the most positive things about where I sit today is that it's influenced the work that I do and that we do so beautifully. I have such an un intimate understanding of what well-being looks like at the community and individual level now. When we talk about with our partners social determinants of health, which are essentially the societal aspects that influence your health, like let's say how wealth influences health access, or how the conditions of your home influence your health. I have such an intimate and real understanding of these things now and of what it means to have neighborhood well-being or community well-being. I find that the work really comes alive for me in new ways, and I see new connections, and I see the harm of disconnections that a lot of our partners speak to. Um, and so, yeah, I think that's been a way in which um, it's really illuminated the work in a very powerful way.
Absolutely. So well-being is so much a part of what our partners are thinking about and framing their work around. So yeah, that is really, really interesting, that alignment, and that you have this experience. I was really struck when you said that you've become a more critical creative. And I think it's such a like it makes such cognitive sense to me that as a dancer, you do have these instructors and they do give you direction and you do follow it. You just follow it. You don't even really question the choreography or question the movements, and you kind of trust them. And I'm hearing you say that your experience with essentially medical racism has forced you, in essence, to become really intimately acquainted with well-being, with connection, with community. And it sounds like also maybe with boundaries or certain key practices that are non-negotiable for you in not only sustaining your health, but also sustaining your creativity while doing this purpose-driven work. And so I wonder if you can share a little bit around what some of those boundaries and practices might look like that could be inspiring for some folks listening.
Yeah, what a beautiful question. I think actually the practice that's been really inspiring for me has been one of continuous learning. Um, continuous learning when it comes to myself, to this new body, to other bodies and what they're going through. And in particular, I think paying attention to what nourishes and what depletes. So, what nourishes me individually, but also nourishes my communities, and what depletes me and can also deplete the communities of which I'm part or that I'm trying to support. So I think it's a new commitment to nourishment. Really, essentially, it's that practice, and it's so much of what I should have integrated, and even before this, just for example, my cups of tea, and really, the sacredness of that time, meals with friends, I think is weirdly non-negotiable for me now because it what keeps me connected to the fact that there is a joyful aspect to food and eating, and it's not just a stressful thing of figuring out how am I gonna, meet my viable minimum nourishment today. I think time in nature, has become something that I do practically almost every day, gentle movement. But I think an important thing to say when you have chronic illnesses or syndrome is that this evolves. You cannot have the same boundaries all the time because sometimes you have periods of flare and sometimes you have period of remission. So the boundaries, they really shift. So, as weird as it sounds, I wish all the people that I love and care for would almost pretend like they had a more severe chronic illness and see what would be their boundaries and what would be their must-have, and try to integrate that into your lives, even when that's not the case, these boundaries and these practices. So, yeah, that's been some of my learnings.
That's so beautiful. This idea of encouraging porous and flexible, amorphous, kind of malleable boundaries that meet you where you're at. Um, and and I love this thought experiment of could we imagine that we also perhaps have a situation in which we have to create these boundaries and what that might look like. I think that's a great thought experiment, and when I'll also give that some thought, and I'm sure that will be great for our listeners as well. Wanted to double click on something that, yeah, I don't know, just sharing that I hear you when you said like, oh, I wish I would have known, I wish I would have implemented this, like my tea, like with my certain teacups that I love, and you know, time tea I know is features quite prominently like in your tea tea life. But it's also like we don't know what we don't know. You know, we just don't know what we don't know. And I have found through life's challenges that sometimes life has a way of creating these conditions, sometimes unfavorable conditions or difficult, challenging ones at the time, uh, that kind of force us to learn ourselves and our needs. And while we don't want to experience difficult, really hard things in life, what I keep hearing surface from you is like there's somehow this silver lining, and like you've really found a way to, I mean, you called yourself a lifelong learner, even in the difficult moments, to really try to learn from yourself, from your body, and from this experience. And I think that's just so beautiful. So I just wanted to honor that and say thank you for that beautiful perspective.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Yeah, absolutely. Something I'm really curious about, and I would love to pose for your consideration, is around the progressive philanthropy sector, with whom we work quite a lot. It's one of our big constituents at Root to Bloom that we support in different ways on their journey. And one of the big conversations that surfaces quite often is around care, it's around equity, you know, but sometimes in practice, it can feel like or seem like the only way you can really keep up with the sector, is, and with this fast-paced world, is with overworking. that, as we know, inevitably and eventually leads to burnout. So I'm curious if you could share if you've encountered barriers when trying to find this balance and how you've been able to navigate them or overcome them.
Yeah, thank you for that question. I think even before all of this, I often pondered at like what mindful philanthropy, what that could look like, what it could look like if it was truly regenerative. I think at the heart of my um, answer for this is really this idea of actually reciprocity and regeneration. So, what I mean by that is I try, and I think as a collective, we try to give what we would like to receive. And so I really believe that as we give our partners in philanthropy the space to rest, to express their needs, to have the flexibility, we do also demonstrate that work can be done differently and creatively, and it can be done kindly. And I think that my hope in having this approach is that this does become sort of a regenerative cycle where we provide rest, care, healing space, and that generates an environment where folks can then provide that back in terms of reciprocity and in terms of mutuality. And, sometimes that's really hard and we still end up overworking. But I do take inspiration because I see that happening. I see the relationships within and with us shifting. I think for me, a really beautiful example of that was a recent facilitation with Hispanics in philanthropy with their fellowship. Where all these different fellows from different foundations were coming together to really have some frank space to talk about their experience as Latinas and philanthropy and all of what that entails. And there's this fellow whose name is Tina, who towards the end of the fellowship wrote this really beautiful poem. It's quite long, but I'll just share one part of it because for me that it really illustrates this idea of regenerative reciprocity that we're trying to seed with philanthropy and with our partners. So she writes and says. In this dream, I'm pinching myself. Was this real? What just happened? Are we really laughing at our trauma this time? The laughter itself a balm, the light shining through our scars like a psalm, stinging a little less than before. We heal in círculo with our stories, shoulder to shoulder, grounded by Pachamama, our humming and dreaming angled upwards to heaven, our past and future ancestors in our hearts and actions. And so I was really inspired by her words and by this entire poem titled Gracias al Diez, that she wrote at the end of the fellowship, because I think it really reaffirms to me that giving balance and giving grace might really truly be one of the ways to create it.
Yes. Oh my goodness. Tina's poem is just so beautiful and such a great reminder. Um, yeah, I feel really touched again hearing it. So thank you for bringing it into the space. Val, I wanted to lift up this idea of healing, which Tina also talked about in her poem there at the end. You know, with folks, teachers I have in my life that I've been sojourning with, I've really learned and come to um, a really intimate understanding that healing is a journey that we are on, that we will be on, that we will sojourn on. And healing is a lifestyle. There are things we have to do, practices like you've talked about. And I don't know if we'll, always arrive at that endpoint in that journey, but I do think it's that this idea of it being a journey. And so I guess with that framing, I'm curious how you think about healing, what it means to you, how do you define it, and how has that definition evolved through your experiences as a Black immigrant, Caribbean, kind of woman navigating chronic illness?
Yeah, I mean, this has been, really centered in the last couple of years for me. I think one of the things that chronic illness challenges many of us with is that a lot of times they don't get better. They don't, quote, heal in the traditional sense. There is no cure for what I have. Many, many chronic illnesses are actually degenerative, and we just feel like we're playing a losing game with time. And so I think I really had to dig deep to figure out the some of the answers to what does healing, mean for me. I think where I've landed, and I'm sure this will evolve over time, is that healing or just or just living really for me is being able to connect. So on one level, being able to connect with my body so that I can enjoy the moments where I can dance, where I can move. It's being able to connect to others by showing up for their birthdays, showing up for their difficult moments, showing up for the sweet moments, and being able to connect to community, actually having moments and pockets of energy to advocate and to imagine what it would look like to have different and new systems. Um, I think, this has evolved a lot for me. There's a lot of disconnection that is created for the sake of resilience when you are a Black or immigrant woman. And so, um, but I do think at the same time, because I see the nefarious impact of fragmentation on so many levels, whether it be within the self or within community or with the planets, and our natural environment, uh, I think this journey and, these different identities have really been good teachers about what healing could mean. But I don't have the answer all figured out yet.
Hmm. Yeah, I love that connectedness. That's a framing I hadn't thought about. Like healing is connectedness to self, to others, to community. And then also you added at the end to the natural environment, which I think is so important for you, especially, but I think for all of us. Um, Val, this has been really awesome. I just kind of want to ask one last question as we close. Would you be able to share a lesson you wish you could share with your younger self or with our listeners about working while living with a chronic illness?
I think the lesson that comes to mind is if you are living with an illness or a syndrome or just something that makes, it difficult to be in your body, to not be ashamed of that. I mean, it's hard. And I think the world, whether through ableism or just different ways throughout the day, will try to shame you so very much. And I think for me, what I would tell my younger self, what I would tell other folks, is to be proud of where you're at, regardless. Be proud of your broken, be proud of your mending, be proud of yourself, and to just seek softness unapologetically.
Wow, that is just so such a beautiful and encouraging perspective um, to abandon shame. And that's really, really powerful. I'm really sitting with that. And I just want to say thank you so much for sharing your heart and your experience so bravely with us today.
Thank you. Thank you for creating such a beautiful space.
Absolutely. As we close this conversation, we just want to take a moment to honor and thank Val, co-founder of Root to Bloom, from Haiti to Cuba to Costa Rica to New York. Val's kind of planetary journey really embodies so much courage, so much vision, and such a radical act of care. And as Val has kind of laid out this kind of four-pronged approach to care for self, for others, for the kind of wider, greater community, and for the planet. Um, and so Val's work, Root to Bloom and beyond, supporting creative, social entrepreneurs, progressive philanthropy to fund their impact. It has always been, as long as I've known Val, rooted in imagination and care, and equity and equity-based approach. And, today she really reminds us that our bodies are part of the work. We cannot separate ourselves from our bodies. Our bodies are the instrument that we use to do this equity work. So we're really appreciating that gentle reminder. Um, and Val's sharing her brave sharing of her experience living with chronic illness and as a woman of color. Val has offered us this really beautiful invitation to give ourselves a rethink about boundaries, about our practices, about the way we relate to ourselves, an invitation to reimagine productivity and what that looks like, to reframe our understanding of healing, perhaps as connectedness, um, gentle connectedness to all of those kind of four parts that I just lifted up. So Val, thank you. Want to ask quickly if you could let the folks know where they can follow you and stay connected in case they'd like to reach out.
Yeah, of course, happy to. I think the easiest way is probably via my LinkedIn.
Amazing, folks. You can find Val at her LinkedIn. It's Valerie Bellande on LinkedIn. And to all of our listeners, if this conversation spoke to you, we would love to invite you to stay rooted with us at Root to Bloom. You can find us online at www.roottobloom.org or follow along on Instagram at We Are Root to Bloom. We are also on LinkedIn at Root to Bloom as well. Until next time, we'll see you soon.